So we're starting right now. All right. So welcome everybody to our first official session of the return of Conchas y Café. This is building towards volume 6, our 6th year of publishing Conchas y Café. And we're working on issue number 1, which right now doesn't have a title yet. Eventually I'll be asking you all for a title suggestion. But the theme, as has been mentioned before, is our voice, our place. And so we're going to be spending the next 12 weeks actually discussing the different concepts of voice and also how to use the physical space of a poem to sort of develop your own voice. Voice can mean a lot of different things. It's not just, the written voice, but also, the concept of our voice as a community. What are the things that we say and how can we use poetry to say them, especially right now, porque pues como todos sabemos, ¿verdad? Estos tiempos ahorita son tiempos medios difíciles, no solo por el virus, pero también porque hay muchas, we'll call them, beefs that everybody has right now. There's a lot of protests going on, and rightly so. Our community is really beginning to express itself in a way that hasn't been seen in a long time. So I'm very happy to have you all here. And being that this is a bilingual workshop, we'll be flipping back and forth between Spanish and English. But all the materials that'll be uploaded to Google Classroom, including this video, everything will be translated in English and Spanish. At least all of the handouts will be. And feel free to write in whatever language you feel most comfortable writing in, whether that be in Spanish or in English or anything in between. So welcome everybody to our first session of Conchas y Café. Now, normally I like to start our sessions with a little quote. And so to be able to present the quote, I'm going to switch over to screen presentation mode. Today's quote comes from actually a shorter poem not a shorter poem, from a very well-known poet who's been around since the 13th century. So as you can see here, hopefully you can see it, today's quote is, "Raise your words, not voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder." Y en español se los traducí como, "Suba sus palabras, no su voz. La lluvia hace crecer a las flores, no los truenos." And like I said, esta cita viene de Rumi. Él nació el 30 de septiembre del año 1207 y falleció el 17 de diciembre en el año 1273. Fue poeta persa, erudito de Islam y teólogo y también un místico sufi. So as a Persian poet and author and theologian and everything, he had a lot of things to say about just kind of like our relationships with ourselves and a lot of different things. And it's I think a pretty cool quote. So what do you guys think? What does this quote say to you? Mauricio?
To me, it just reminds me of like the term, like, make sure your words and the content of your words are just and true. And I think the metaphor of like thunder versus rain, I think in terms of like uplifting your message, to me, it just speaks of like just being sure that what you're saying isn't like either throwing hate on anyone or is speaking anything but the truth. I guess like thunder to me is like someone that may be wrong about something just wants to speak louder to get their message heard so they can kind of overpower whoever they are arguing against. It just seems like it's a tactical way of saying, like, research what the hell you're saying before you open your mouth.
Right. Don't just talk the talk.
Yeah,
I dig that. Judith? Need to unmute yourself, Judith.
Yes.
There you go.
Para mí suena mucho como dice Mauricio, pero también es como reforzarnos que si tienes bien clara tu conversación, no necesitas gritar. No necesitas imponerte, lo que quieres es que te escuchen. Y con la lluvia la siembra crece, no nada más las flores. Entonces puedes lograr mucho más con buenas palabras bien plantadas en lugar de llegar con gritos y sombrerazos.
Mhm. Jorge?
Yeah, just to add to that as well, I see it as like kind of like symbolic of like the collective voice, like as opposed to the individual voice, because when I think of rain, I think of multiple drops of rain. So it's like a collective voice that cultivates like flowers and helps things grow. It's like by connecting with each other and community in that respect.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a really good interpretation, right? Like a single drop of water may not get things wet, but a whole cloud of rain, that'll definitely, nos empapa la lluvia. And that, I think, in a way does sort of speak to how our voice, our collective voice, could help things kind of move along. Anyone else have any thoughts? Well, I think that this concept of voice and what our voice could do, right? The power of either you raising your voice or speaking softly. I think that that's also kind of a tool, right? Because a person could say in a very rude way, right? The things that they wish would change, or they could ask for things in a sort of like quote unquote foul mouthed way. But if you say things in a way that actually speaks more maybe to people's emotions, to their heart, or to their logical mind, you can make an argument that might actually change their mind too. So there's something to kind of that idea, right? It's a very deliberate way of crafting our voice, which is, I think, what most authors do anyway. We don't pick any word just because it's the first word that comes to mind. We pick always the right word for whatever it is that we're trying to express. So yeah. If in case anybody, by the way, didn't catch the quote earlier, it is in the chat. I copy and pasted it over. So the quote, once again, was raise your words, not voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder. Y en español, la cita era, suba sus palabras, no su voz. La lluvia hace crecer a las flores, no los truenos. So, yeah. I'm gonna switch back over to the presentation mode so you guys can see the next thing that we're gonna cover. Like I said before, the theme of this series is gonna be, our voice, our place. And so I think it's good for us to define the idea of voice, specifically poetic voice. So I did a little bit of research and I found this particular kind of definition, I wanna say, by Laurie Zupan. It's found on the website that you see there, which is off of writersdigest.com, an article that this individual wrote. And they defined poetic voice as poetic voice is rooted in the use and repetition of specific elements, technical elements that make a poem recognizable as belonging to one poet. I feel like that's a very specific way of defining poetic voice. Y aquí se los traducí. La voz poética tiene raíz en el uso y repetición de elementos particulares, elementos técnicos que hacen a un poema identificable como perteneciendo a un poeta. That's probably a pretty standard way, I would say, of defining voice. How would you all define voice, poetic voice? Being that you're all authors and most of you published authors with us. Actually, all of you are published authors with DSTL Arts. How would you define poetic voice? What does it mean to you?
I think that poems give you the freedom. The poem doesn't always find a conclusion like an essay would do, right? That you have the freedom to explore an idea, to take the risk. You may not find the answer, but at least you are challenging the elements to look for an answer. And I think that's important.
That's a really good observation, Eddie. No?
Poetic voice to me, it speaks to like all of the other poets and influences and authors that have affected, one's life. So I feel like going back to Jorge's point about like Ray representing like the collective voice, I feel like poetic voice to me is that as well. It's like I feel that the voice that we have when we write our poetry isn't just like a lot of it is our own thoughts, but it also it's watercolored with the influences of other favorite poets or even other favorite could be artists. There's all these different elements that kind of color our own view of the world, and that shows up on the page. Absolutely, for better or worse.
Yeah. I like how you put that. It's watercolored. Yes, Caro?
So I don't know, I guess when I was thinking of a poetic voice, I thought of like what makes me recognize like another like poet is like their style. And that kind of brings up like for me a question is like is style, what's like the difference between style and voice, or are they like pretty similar?
How would you guys answer that?
I guess like style to me would be more individualized, like your own spin on, a form of those technical elements. I don't know. That's what I think. Like style to me is more individualized versus voice is more of, everything that you're saying plus everything that has been said already.
Interesting. If you look at the definition, though, and just to reference it one more time without taking over the screen, right? Laurie Zupan said that poetic voice is rooted in the use and repetition of specific elements, technical elements that make a poem recognizable as belonging to one poet. Eso para mí significa que no es solo lo que dicen, sino también las técnicas que usan, la retórica que usan. Rhetorical devices like repetitions, off rhyme or slant rhyme, as it's called. Sometimes those things, they might be very specific to a poet. Same thing with maybe even their way of presenting their work, like E. Cummings or, many authors that use only undercase letters, right? Lowercase letters. That's a very unique stylistic thing, but also I think one could argue it's part of their voice, right? Can't remember the name. The name escapes me right now, but the one author that very purposely does not capitalize her name. She does that because she doesn't want to basically say that her as an author is some sort of authority or it's more of a practice in equality, right? By everything being lowercase, everyone is equal. So that's more of a stylistic statement, but that's also kind of part of her voice, one would argue, right? Judith?
¿Me escuchan? Sí.
Sí.
Yo lo estaba poniendo como del lado más orgánico y para mí sonaba como la voz poética es cuando el corazón entrelaza las emociones, los sentimientos y los pensamientos y los expresa.
Sí, eso es parte de la voz poética. And thank you, Jorge, for bringing up the name. It was bell hooks who I was trying to reference. So, appreciate that. Pero sí, la voz poética es la manera en que uno se expresa, al fin. ¿Verdad? Si lo vamos a reducir a algo muy sencillo para que se pueda entender, es la manera en que nos expresamos. ¿Verdad? Cada quien tiene su manera, right? Just like the saying in Spanish goes, cada cabeza su propio mundo. Every voice has its own unique sort of like timbre, its own range, its own sound. And that's not just the physical, right? My voice might sound similar to my dad's, for example, but they're not the same. If you hear us, speaking at the same time and you compare us, like the physical voice that I use to speak that you hear is not the same as anybody else's. But also that applies to even my writing. I know that stylistically, a lot of times I have very complex sentences and I use commas and I use semicolons and things like that when I'm writing in prose that are unique to me. And then my poetry, my line breaks, my use of particular words, what we call my lexicon, that's also particular to me. No one else can necessarily copy that. You might imitate it, but nobody else will have the same exact style. And the same goes for all of you. All right, so that's a question there.
Louis?
Is that you, Miss Lois?
That's me, Lois.
There's some feedback happening. Is there a way for you to? Oh, I think she hung up. Oh, okay. I don't know what happened there, but hopefully we'll be able to get her back. Does anybody have any questions before we kind of move on? Or any other insights on voice? No? All right. Well, if we get Miss Lois back, we'll hopefully be able to answer her question. I'm gonna go back to presentation mode here, and I'll be sharing with you this week's poem that we'll be using to discuss voice. And one particular technique too that I've actually brought up many times. Those of you that are regulars, you'll probably recognize it, but this week I found a nice short little poem by Toy Derico. I hope I'm saying their name right. Toy Derico, as you can see here, was born in 1941. This individual is still alive. They are an American poet and co-founder of the Cave Canem Foundation. Cave Canem, if in case you've never heard of it before, is a foundation that very actively and specifically works with Black and African American writers to help elevate their voices. And this person was also a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets from the years 2012 to 2017. And the name of the poem is Why I Don't Write About George Floyd. Because there is too much to say. Because I have nothing to say. Because I don't know what to say. Because everything has been said. Because it hurts too much to say. What can I say? What can I say? Something is stuck in my throat. Something is stuck like an apple. Something is stuck like a knife. Something is stuffed like a foot. Something is stuffed like a body. Y en español se los traducí a el por qué no escribo sobre George Floyd. Porque hay demasiado por decir. Porque tengo nada que decir. Porque no sé qué decir. Porque todo ya se ha dicho. Porque duele demasiado al decir. ¿Qué puedo decir? ¿Qué puedo decir? Hay algo atorado en mi garganta. Hay algo atorado como manzana. Hay algo atorado como navaja. Hay algo metido como un pie. Hay algo metido como un cuerpo. Well, obviously, you don't have the handout in front of you, but unless if you downloaded it earlier. But what do you guys think? How'd you feel hearing the poem? Any initial thoughts or reactions?
I think that the poem does a great job internalizing that sometimes we're afraid to speak but not to write, especially when things get so polarizing. That's what I get.
Yeah, it's a great observation. Anyone else? Jeremy?
As you were reading it, I couldn't help but feel like I was thinking a lot of the same things. Like he was saying that he didn't know what to write, what to say, because everything had already been said. And that's kind of like what I was thinking, because I wanted to write about it too, but I'm like, everything's already been said. Like, what can I say that's different? You know, what am I going to say that's going to change anything? But I think just hearing it all like in one poem as one shot, it's like, yeah, that's true. You know, like, I mean, these ideas have been around.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what your comment right now just made me think of was the concept of continuity and change. Right? That was one of the concepts that we discussed during the last series, and continuity and change really just simply means that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Right? The death of George Floyd is nothing new, really, in the history of the United States. And even since the death of George Floyd, there's been other deaths, unfortunately, of other Black men throughout the country. And one of the most recent one was actually in Palmdale, so here in LA County, with the hanging of a Black man. You know, they were actually lynched. And Eddie, I see your face. Yeah, man, that actually happened. You know, and like I said, that's not necessarily surprising, but it's still something that we need to address, right? But what do you do when you even feel like your voice is just going to be just another raindrop? Right? What do you do? I mean, how would you address it? Any answers?
I make myself, I guess, find other raindrops, make a splash.
Yeah. I mean, every raindrop counts towards a bigger goal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right? Every raindrop that falls does help a flower grow. It's not just one single little drop by itself. Let me ask you kind of the opposite though, right? What would you do if you felt like you had no voice? You as authors, as writers now. I know I've gone through this where I felt kind of like in this poem, I felt like I had no right or no place to say something. Or maybe because everything has already been said, there's no point in me saying it. What's the best thing that you could do? What's your answer to that, Jorge?
I would say just listen, like be open to what others have to say, and just listening is also something that's important, especially during these times, I think.
Yeah. Mauricio?
Just to add to that, I would, you know, kind of take a step back and give that space open to maybe someone that does feel like they have to say something, and also, you know, try to learn, you know, try to educate myself. If it's a situation that I don't know the whole story or the history of, or, you know, try to absorb as much as I can so that I feel when I am questioned or put to the test or someone says, how can you say that? I can say, well, it's because I've seen X, Y, and Z. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think what both of y'all said was like very valid. And I think what I was thinking before that, because I think it is really important to listen, but I guess what I was thinking about before y'all said that is that quote by Audre Lorde about, and I can't remember how it goes exactly, but you know, you can't, basically the idea behind it is you can't be afraid to speak and to speak up. And that's kind of what this poem made me think, is like, yeah, we are, I think at some point when this keeps, when this keeps happening over and over and over again, like it's really hard to keep talking about it because we're so like weary and tired and like it feels like nothing's going to change. But I think it's important that like we do, we do keep speaking up. And I think it's also important to like learn and listen and all that. I'm not trying to say it's not, but I do think it's also important for us to continue to speak up. And yes, thank you, Mauricio. That's the quote. And so, yeah.
Yeah. The quote, by the way, if in case any of you can't see it, it's And Mauricio, thank you for putting it in the chat. It goes, and when we speak, we are afraid. Our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. That's from Audre Lorde. So yeah, it's a very appropriate quote. I think, and it's interesting, right? Contrast that quote with what the poem is saying, right? And I'm going to read the poem again to you guys. Because there is too much to say, because I have nothing to say, because I don't know what to say, because everything has been said, because it hurts too much to say. What can I say? What can I say? Something is stuck in my throat. Something is stuck like an apple. Something is stuck like a knife. Something is stuffed like a foot. Something is stuffed like a body. Y una vez en español, una vez más. Porque hay demasiado por decir. Porque tengo nada que decir. Porque no sé qué decir. Porque todo ya se ha dicho. Porque duele demasiado al decir. ¿Qué puedo decir? ¿Qué puedo decir? Hay algo atorado en mi garganta. Hay algo atorado como manzana. Hay algo atorado como navaja. Hay algo metido como un pie. Hay algo metido como un cuerpo. Compare that again with the quote that by Audre Lorde. Mauricio?
He says things without saying them outright, though. Like I feel like in the poem, like he's not saying something. If that makes any sense, he's not. He's saying stuff without actually, naming those things. Like I guess he's using like that context in order to speak what he wants to say.
Yeah.
Because I know that like poetry can also be what is not said and what is not written.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. That was going to be my next question to you guys.
Oh.
All right. Voice is one thing, right? What we say is important and what we write is important. But just like Mauricio just said right now, what we don't say, what is left out is also important, right? Think of voice, poetic voice, and voice in general. It's not just being something that you use, it's also something you don't use. It's like what Jorge was saying before about sometimes it's okay to just sit and be quiet and listen, right? Discussion is about that. It's about contributing, but also absorbing. And so our voice, the way that we can assert our voice and our place, I think personally, requires both, right? Both listening and also speaking. So now there are.
I just wanted to say, could I chime in?
Yes, please.
Just that the sense of helplessness in the poem really comes through, but also the need to say something, anything will help him heal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because it is something literally that's choking him, just like George Floyd was choked. So I think it is a very important message he is helping us feel that asphyxiation that I think we're all feeling with not being able to change anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that right there is a great connection to make, right? Because the poem doesn't exist just by itself as a poem that's saying, I can't say anything. I can't express myself. It's also, I think, just like Ms. Luz was just saying right now, This is something that is specifically addressing an event that happened, an event that resulted because of a black man being choked to death and asphyxiated. And I think that him repeating multiple times, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, is something that the poem is kind of doing too, isn't it? I mean, the poem repeatedly says, because I, because I, because I, there's something stuck, is repeated multiple times. It's, I think, a great way to sort of, in a way, mimic that space and time, that place, and that feeling even, right? Of not being able to breathe. That's a great observation, Miss Luz. Honestly, I didn't even think of that on my own when I first read the poem. Now, the tool that's used, what do you guys think it is? Some of you might remember this word before. You might be able to recognize it in the structure of the poem. I'm gonna go back to presentation mode too, for those of you that can see the screen, just so that you can get a better idea of what I'm asking. But remember, there's a lot going on here, right? Porque hay demasiado, porque tengo, porque no, porque todo, porque duele. Hay algo atorado, hay algo atorado, hay algo atorado, hay algo metido, hay algo metido. Because there is, because I have, because I don't, because everything, because it hurts. Something is stuck, something is stuck, something is stuck, something is stuffed, something is stuffed. You have that repetition at the beginning of every line, almost. What does that do for us?
Reinforcement?
It reinforces for sure.
I think it makes it very present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely notice that everything is an active verb, right? Something is stuffed. So the verb is active. It's not in past tense, and it's not in future tense. It's in present tense. Is there any other observations that you guys have about that repetition?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the repetition is like, this is like a repetition. It's like what the poem is saying is that like this has been like the reason that this that we what is there to say is because this has been happening over and over and over again. So I feel like that's what the repetition is emphasizing, is the fact that this is it's been happening, it is happening like in this current moment. And like you said earlier, Luis, is like, yeah, how many people have been murdered since George Floyd, right? So this isn't, this is just, it just keeps happening. So, and I think that the repetition reinforces that.
Right. And that stylistic choice is a very, it's a very deliberate choice, I think. It does reinforce all of these things that we're saying. Miss Michelle, welcome back.
Hi. Thank you.
Yeah. Did you have a comment to make on the poem?
Well, why I don't write about George Floyd?
Yes, that one.
Okay. Well, I think that the poem speaks volumes because of the fact of what's happened in this country for all people of color who have experienced situational systemic racism, and it's unfortunate that she doesn't have to say a word because, unfortunately, we know. I mean, from 1619 to 2020, this is 401 years, and it happens, and this is still existing. And racism, to me, is an incurable disease, and there's no cure for it, unfortunately. And you can always be political about it because of Trump, but even without Trump, it seems as if racism and COVID-19 seem to go hand in hand in regards to a global pandemic of racism and illness. And people are dying from it, from both. So that's how I look at it. And unfortunately, I won't say unfortunately, but this poet's perspective is there's nothing to say because we live it every day. We're all affected by it. no matter how small, medium, or large situation, systemic racism is, as well as what's happening with COVID. I think, unfortunately, racism and COVID-19 are equal opportunity destroyers because of the fact that no matter what happens, we are all affected by it, regardless of what color you are or what color you aren't.
Right. Yeah. And and I think that the poem definitely does try to just remind us, right, that these things are active and real. I'm gonna go back to presentation mode, and I'm gonna present to you guys what it is, that tool that we were talking about. That repetition has a name, and that name, I've mentioned it many times before. If you can see here, it's called Anaphora. For those listening, it's Anaphora. And then in español, it's simple, Anaphora. Anaphora. Anaphora is the repetition of a word or expression at the beginning of successive phrases, clauses, sentences, or verses, especially for rhetorical or poetic effect. Anáfora es la repetición de una palabra o frase al inicio de frases, cláusulas, oraciones o versos en sucesivo, especialmente para efecto retórico o poético. I know I've mentioned that word before on several occasions, and it is one of those things that, is a tool. It's a rhetorical tool that is used so that we can, again, repeat things, so that we can create a sense of rhythm. And in the case of this poem, to just, I think, give us that sense of asphyxiation, right? Just like Miss Luz said. I'm sure you've seen that used before, that technique used before. There's definitely songs out there that have that same kind of structure. There's other poems too. Mauricio, do you have a question?
I was just going to say that it's a very old device. It's actually used in the Bible as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's actually one of those things that when it comes to performance, it was a tool that was really developed to help people remember what lines come next. So even from a performance standpoint, it's been around since basically poets were traveling, songbirds, you could say. So that's our tool for this week, Anaphora. Does anybody have any questions about the tool that we're going to try to use this week?
Hey, Luis.
Yes.
I looked up the definition as well and saw that it said the first part of a sentence. I was wondering if you could share, like, how much would constitute a first part? Would it be like a first word, first whole like a whole first sentence? Just curious where that line is drawn.
Good question. So that's a very, very key part of this, right? It's the first part. We're at the beginning. There's a different device that's called a different name where it's at the very end. So the repetition happens at the end of a line. But what's considered the first part or the beginning of a clause or a phrase or a line of poetry kind of depends, I guess, on the length of your line or the length of the sentence itself. So it could be, the same word repeated over and over again at the beginning, like, something like, say, speech, right? If you're going to say speech at the beginning of every line of a poem, speech is, speech does, speech acts, speech tastes. The word speech by itself could be the use of anaphora, but what really kind of makes it anaphora, full anaphora, is that you're modifying it ever so slightly every time that you use it. So referencing back the Toy Derricott poem, Toy Derricott starts because there is, and then the second line, because I have. The third line, because I don't, because everything, because it hurts, right? Every single use of the word because is followed by a very slight variation. Y esa variación muy pequeña, aunque sea una pequeña variación, eso es lo que causa anáfora, ¿verdad? Porque es la misma repetición de la palabra o de la cláusula, pero con una modificación tan sutil que crea para nosotros los lectores un ritmo. It really does come down to this concept of creating rhythm with your voice. And so, you know, your definition of anaphora can kind of change from your style to the next person's style, if that kind of makes sense. Any other questions or comments regarding anaphora? No. Seeing a lot of looks like a lot of satisfied faces. All right. Well, so like I said, this is going to be our tool for the week, right? So I'm going to present to you one more time what your writing prompt for this week will be. Y cada semana, para los que no están acostumbrados, cada semana les voy a dar un tema de escritura. And like I've said before to you who have participated in the past, you know, these are just suggestions, right? You don't have to write these writing prompts. You don't have to write to them. But it's a way for you to hopefully practice some of the tools or concepts that we're discussing. So for this week, your quote unquote homework assignment is to express through poetry that which leaves you without words. Repeat it, restate it, remix it as many ways as you can. Exprese a través de poesía a aquello que lo deja sin palabras. Repítalo, reflea, remezclalo las cuantas veces que pueda. Tomando como inspiración el poema de Floyd, como dije hace rato, cada línea se repite, pero no se repite a la vez. Es algo diferente. Expresa algo diferente. And just like how each line does try to express in a different way the same concept, that's what I'm hoping you're able to do with that one thing that leaves you speechless, that leaves you without words. So, are there any questions before we sign off for this week?
I do have one question. You mentioned, you said there's like a different name for what, like the last word of, or like the last repetition. Cause I noticed that it's like the first part of this poem, like they use the word say at the end of each of the, like a lot of the lines. So I just want to know.
Yeah. You want to know what the alternate version of that is?
Yeah.
Let's see. I always forget it, so bear with me for a second. I'm looking.
Oh, it's okay. I can look it up too.
Yeah, but it's something like dysphora.
Anadiplosis?
Not anadiplosis, but where are you?
Epistrophe. I'm muted.
Not epistrophe.
Oh, I'm not muted. But, it's not epistrophe?
No, I don't. If I remember correctly, it's not epistrophe, but I might be wrong. Either way, I'll have to look it up and I'll get back to you guys in the chat for our Google Classroom. If that's all right with you guys. Maybe we'll use it next week. So anyways, this week though, just try using anaphora, right? That's your main challenge for the week. And use it to express something that you feel leaves you speechless. You know, just like I said, you know, Toy Derricott wrote in their poem that the reason why they don't write about George Floyd is because there's nothing to say, but there's so much to say, and it hurts to say it. So think about, what is the thing that you would want to say? What is the thing that you can't say or that you struggle to say? It doesn't have to be, political commentary like the George Floyd, instance, but if it takes you there, then go there, right? Write whatever comes to you, and write it in your voice. That's what ultimately we're going to be doing. We're going to be practicing our voice in every single poem that we write. So I'm going to be uploading this recording of the lesson to YouTube, and then also to the Google Classroom page. So if you're already signed up on Google Classroom, excellent. You'll have access to all of the handouts and all of the materials throughout the remainder of the 12 weeks. There will also be a space there for you under the assignments tab where you can actually upload your poem that you write this week. And that way I'll be able to give you feedback on your poem. Así que aprovechen del recurso, de la herramienta que es Google Classroom. Si tienen preguntas o algo así, se pueden comunicar conmigo a través de Google Classroom. Or if you want to, email me or anything like that to ask a question, you're always welcome to do that too. If it's something that I find relevant to the entire class, I'll address it in the stream for the Google Classroom. But for the most part, feel free to reach out, and definitely share with each other too. Use the chat space of the Google Classroom stream to share. Judith, ¿tenía pregunta?
Sí, gracias. Disculpe, ¿podría poner la parte donde está la tarea o decírnoslas otra vez, por favor?
Sí,
Exprese por poesía. Ahora sí estoy tomando notas.
Ok, perfecto. El tema de esta semana es exprese a través de poesía a aquello que lo deja sin palabras. Repítalo, reformuléelo, remézclalo las cuantas veces que pueda.
Ok, gracias.
Y como acabo de decir, igual como este video, también el folleto que es parte de esta semana va a estar en Google Classroom. Así que lo van a poder bajar, lo van a poder ver y utilizar como necesiten.
Okay.
So all handouts, all materials that are shared will be available on Google Classroom. I'll try to also upload the handout either the day before the next session or the weekend before. So somewhere around that time frame. Just stay active on the Google Classroom, and you'll hopefully not miss it. That way you can reference it and print it out if you want to reference it while we're having the lesson. And every Tuesday at 6:30, it'll be probably the same Google Meet link that you'll be able to use to enter the class session. Either way, same thing. I'll post it on the Google Classroom feed for you guys to know exactly where to click and enter the lesson. So, any last questions before we sign off? No? All right. Well, fue un placer verlos otra vez. See you guys next Tuesday, and have a great week. Enjoy Anaphora. Bye, all.
Thanks, Luis.
You're welcome. Take care, Miss Luz.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
It was good.
Bye, guys.
Take care.
Bye. Bye. Gusto verlos a todos.
Igual. Bye.
Igualmente.
Bye.